Welcome back to Mr. Midnight. Look, I need to tell you something about Oregon. Most people think it's just rain and hipsters, right? Wrong, dead wrong, because what I found in these 7 stories, man, I haven't slept properly in days. We're talking about a park ranger who became part of something he can't escape, a photographer who sees death before it happens. And here's the thing, these aren't some Reddit creepypastas. These are real accounts from real people who made one simple mistake. They didn't listen to the tribes who've been screaming warnings for 200 years. See, Oregon was built on stolen sacred ground. And whatever was sleeping underneath, it's waking up, hungry, angry, and it remembers every single tree we cut down, every warning we laughed at. So before we start, subscribe if you want more stories that'll make you think twice before ignoring that no trespassing sign. Hit the bell because trust me, you'll want to know what's lurking in your own backyard. All right, let's get into it. Story number 1 starts with something innocent, just a guy walking dogs. But what he found on that trail, that's where everything went wrong. My name is Isaiah Washington, and I've been walking dogs professionally for 7 years in Portland. What I'm about to tell you happened in April 2025 in Forest Park, the same forest where my Multnomah ancestors once lived before disease wiped them out in 1830. My great-grandmother told me stories before she passed. She was one of the last who remembered the old words, the old warnings. She always said the stones in Forest Park were different. They had hungering spirits inside them, entities the Chinook called Kuwait Skookum, stone that eats. I never listened to her warnings. I should have. I run Pack Adventures PDX, just me and my van, taking care of 6 to 8 dogs every day. The work pays enough to keep me fed, and I love being outdoors with the animals. Dogs are honest. They don't lie or hide things. When they're scared, you know something's really wrong. Forest Park has been my workplace for 7 years. I know every trail, every seasonal creek, every place where aggressive dogs hang out. I've handled everything. Coyote encounters, aggressive owners, dogs eating dead salmon. I thought I understood this forest completely. But on April 3rd, 2025, the forest showed me something my ancestors tried to warn about for generations. Something that should have stayed hidden under the earth. That morning started normal. I picked up my regular Tuesday pack. Tank, the German Shepherd, Bella and Zeus, 2 labs, Pip, the nervous rescue mutt, Oscar, the old golden retriever, and Daisy, the corgi mix, who thinks she runs everything. We drove to Forest Park like always. The Wildwood Trail was our usual route, wide enough for the whole pack. Good exercise, usually empty, at 7 a.m. on weekdays. 20 minutes into the walk, all 6 dogs stopped walking. Not gradually, not one at a time. Simultaneously, like someone cut their power. They stood perfectly still, all staring at the exact same spot 20 feet ahead on the trail. I'd been walking dogs for 7 years. I'd never seen anything like it. These animals had completely different personalities, different fears, different energy levels. But they were all focused on one point with total intensity. Tank started making a sound I'd never heard before, a deep whimper from his chest. This was a dog who'd faced down coyotes without flinching. But something ahead terrified him. I looked where they were staring. There was a stone in the middle of the trail. About 3 feet tall, dark grey, covered in what looked like carved markings. Strange faces pressed into the surface, all with their mouths open like they were screaming. Here's what I knew for certain. This stone had never been here before. I walked this exact trail 3 times a week. I knew every tree, every fallen log, every permanent feature. This stone wasn't here Monday, and it was way too big for someone to move overnight. You'd need heavy equipment. "Come on, guys," I said, trying to move the pack. "Forward." They wouldn't budge. 6 dogs, all pulling backward on their leashes, desperate to leave. Pip was actually shaking. Daisy, who usually charges at everything, was cowering behind my legs. I walked closer to investigate. Maybe there was a dead animal nearby, some scent the dogs didn't like. The closer I got, the stranger the stone looked. The markings weren't random, they were faces, dozens of faces, all screaming, but they didn't look carved. They looked pressed into the stone from inside, like people trying to push out through the rock. When I got within 5 feet, I felt heat. The stone was warm, maybe 98 degrees, body temperature. In April, under heavy tree cover at 50 degrees outside. Tank's whimpering got louder. Behind me, all 6 dogs were trying to run back toward the van. I reached out and touched the surface. The texture was wrong immediately, not like rock, like bone or skin that had turned hard. There was give to it, like something soft underneath. My hand stuck to it, not like glue. My skin was actually fusing to the stone surface. I tried to pull away and had to yank hard, tearing skin off my palm. Blood dripped onto the stone. The blood didn't roll off. It was absorbed instantly, like the stone was drinking it. Where my blood touched, the surface turned darker, and the screaming faces became clearer, more defined. I could see individual features now, different ages, men and women, and one face looked familiar. That's when I grabbed all 6 leashes and ran. The dogs needed no encouragement. We sprinted back to the van. I loaded them up with shaking hands and drove straight to urgent care to get my palm looked at. The nurse practitioner cleaned the wound, but she kept staring at the torn skin. "What did you say you touched?" she asked. "A stone, rock formation." "Rocks don't cause tears like this. The tissue looks almost..." She trailed off. "I'm prescribing antibiotics just in case." I called Portland Parks and Recreation that afternoon, reported a potential safety hazard on the Wildwood Trail. They said they'd send someone to check. The next morning, I met Ranger Michelle at the trailhead. We walked to where the stone had been. Nothing. No stone, no sign anything had been there. The trail looked completely normal. "Are you sure this is the right spot?" Michelle asked. I was absolutely sure, but there was no evidence. No displaced soil, no scratches on trees, nothing. "Maybe someone moved it overnight," I said, knowing it was impossible. Michelle was polite, but clearly thought I'd imagined it. "We'll keep an eye out," she said. That night I went online and searched missing persons reports for Forest Park. Took me an hour, but I found it. Jeremy Patterson, 32, disappeared while hiking in October 2019. Never found. The face I'd seen in the stone was identical to Jeremy's missing person photo. Same features, same bone structure. But Jeremy's photo showed him smiling. The face in the stone was screaming. Friday morning, April 5th, I tried a different trail, Leif Erikson, half a mile from the Wildwood Trail. 20 minutes into the walk, the dogs stopped again, full stop, all staring ahead. The stone was there. Bigger now, at least 4 feet tall, in a completely different location. This time I took a photo before turning around. When I got home and zoomed in, I could see more faces. Jeremy Patterson was still there, but now there were others. Men, women, different ages, all screaming. I spent hours researching that night. Found 3 more missing hikers from Forest Park over the past 6 years. Their faces were all in my photo. Saturday, I tried the Ridge Trail, opposite side of the park. The dogs went crazy before we even left the parking lot. I could see the stone waiting at a trail junction I used regularly. 5 feet tall now, like it knew my routine. By Sunday, I couldn't take the dogs anywhere near Forest Park. They could sense it from the parking lot. Monday morning, April 8th, I woke up with something wrong with my hand. Where I'd torn the skin on the stone, there was a patch of grey, hardened skin, not like a scab, like bone, hard, grey, spreading from the original wound. I went back to urgent care. Dr. Kim examined it under a magnifying lamp. "This is rapid ossification," she said. "Your skin is literally turning to bone. I've never seen anything like it." Blood work, X-rays, cultures, all negative for infection. But the bone-like growth was real and spreading. Dr. Kim prescribed stronger antibiotics, but by evening, my entire palm was hard grey bone. I couldn't close my fingers or feel anything. That's when I called my cousin Robert on the Grand Ronde reservation. He's one of the few who still knows the old stories. "Isaiah, you need to listen carefully," he said, when I described what happened. "Great-grandmother tried to warn you about this. The old people called it Squahia Skookum, the hungry stone. It's been sleeping under Forest Park for almost 200 years. That's just folklore, Robert. No, it's not. In 1828, before the diseases came, there was a medicine man named Clemex. The white man's name was Grey Eagle. He tried to bind a stone spirit that was eating people from villages along the Columbia, but the binding was weak. He knew it would break eventually. That's just a story. The stone feeds by marking people, then slowly converting their flesh to mineral while it hunts them. Once you're completely turned to stone, you become part of it. Conscious and aware, but trapped forever. That's why the faces scream. My arm was stone up to the elbow by Tuesday morning. I called Robert again. "Hey, how do I stop it?" Great-grandmother said there was only one way. You have to make the choice Ptolemax couldn't make. You have to choose destruction over consumption. What does that mean? The stone grows by consuming people, but what if you don't let it finish? What if you destroy yourself before the conversion is complete? I researched frantically. There was a building demolition happening downtown Thursday morning, an old office complex being torn down with explosives. By Wednesday, April 10th, I was 70% stone. Only my left arm, part of my face, and a section of my torso remained flesh. I couldn't walk, had to drag myself with my remaining arm. The stone had appeared inside my apartment, 10 feet tall now, taking up half my living room. It had somehow grown through the floor overnight. I could hear them now, the voices of everyone trapped inside. Dozens of people screaming, "Run, get away, it's growing, it's eating us!" Jeremy Patterson's voice was clearest. "It hunted me for 6 years. I tried to leave Oregon, but it followed. Once it marks you, it never stops. Took 3 weeks to convert me completely." The worst part isn't the transformation, it's afterward. I'm still conscious. I feel everything. I've been trapped inside this thing for 6 years, watching it hunt others. "You have maybe 12 hours, another voice said. "Then you'll be completely stone, completely aware, completely trapped, and it'll mark someone else." My own face was forming on the stone's surface, even though I wasn't fully converted yet. Thursday morning, April 11th, 5 a.m. Using my one functioning arm, I dragged myself out of my apartment. Took 3 hours to move 2 blocks, my stone leg scraping concrete, leaving a trail of blood from my remaining flesh. The stone followed, rolling, shifting, pursuing me. The faces were screaming, "Don't do it, you'll die completely, at least as stone you're still alive." But I kept moving. The demolition was scheduled for 10 a.m. 8:47 a.m. I reached the building and crawled through a gap in the security fence. The demolition team was doing final checks. I had to get inside and hide. I dragged myself to the basement and propped against a support pillar. 95% of my body was stone now. Only my left hand, part of my face, one eye, remained flesh. 9:55 a.m. The team finished checks and evacuated. Countdown began. Demolition in 5 minutes. The stone broke through the fence and rolled toward the building. 12 feet tall now, somehow pulling mass from the earth itself. I had seconds. With my one remaining hand, I grabbed a piece of rebar and drove it into my throat. Not to kill myself, I was barely alive anyway, but to destroy the last flesh before the stone could claim it. Blood poured out, my remaining flesh died, the conversion stopped at 95%. The stone reached my body just as the countdown hit 0. 10 a.m. the building exploded. 2,000 pounds of explosives reduced the structure to rubble. My body was destroyed. The 95% stone parts shattered, the 5% flesh pulverized. Nothing remained intact enough for the stone to complete its ancient hunger. The stone survived but cracked into 4 large pieces. The faces were still there, still aware, but now separated. Cleanup crews found the fragments, assumed they were building foundation, and hauled them to Columbia Ridge landfill, buried under tons of construction debris. But here's what I learned from the voices, what I understand now. The 47 people trapped in those fragments are still conscious, still aware. But now they're in separate pieces, buried, unable to communicate. Each fragment contains 8 to 12 faces, each experiencing isolated consciousness in the dark. And me? I'm not sure. 95% of me was converted when I bled out. That 95% might be trapped in one of those fragments. Or maybe I died completely when I destroyed the remaining flesh. My clients never heard from me again. Missing persons report was filed, never solved. My van sat in the Forest Park parking lot for weeks before being towed. Here's what nobody knows. The fragments are still growing. By July 2025, landfill workers reported strange rock formations in the garbage heaps. By September, one formation was 6 feet tall. It has faces. The hungry stone doesn't die. It can't die. Fragmentation just created 4 separate entities, all rebuilding, all needing to consume people to regain their mass. Forest Park remains open. Hikers go missing occasionally. Always ruled accidents, fell into ravines, exposure, animal attacks. But sometimes hikers report seeing stones that weren't there before. Stones with faces, stones warm to the touch. My great-grandmother's warnings echo in my mind. Kuwait skukum ayama, the stone that eats people. It sleeps until someone bleeds on it. Then it wakes hungry. The Multnomah people knew. They tried to warn us. The stone spirits in Forest Park were never fully bound, only sleeping. If you're hiking and your dog stops suddenly staring at something ahead, listen to them. Animals know what we've forgotten, turn around, leave immediately, because some stones grow hungry, and once they taste your blood, they never stop following. The old people were right. We should have listened. In memory of my great-grandmother who tried to keep the old warnings alive. Author's note: this story incorporates authentic elements from Chinookan and Multnomah oral traditions, including references to stone spirits, the historical devastation of disease in 1830, and sacred forest sites. The Chinook words used are based on historical linguistic records, though translated through modern understanding. This retelling honors the original cultural context while adapting the ancient warnings for contemporary audiences. Forest Park in Portland is indeed built on former Multnomah territory, and the displacement and near extinction of these peoples through disease and colonization is historical fact. The petroglyphs and sacred stone sites referenced in this story are based on actual archaeological evidence found throughout the Columbia River Gorge region. If you visit Forest Park today, please remember that you walk on sacred ground. Honor the land and the people who lived there first. My name is Melissa Torres. I've been documenting death for 3 years now, though I didn't know that's what I was doing when it started. Back then, I was just a wedding photographer trying to make a living in a world where everyone thinks they can take professional photos with their phones. I grew up in Medford, about 8 miles from Jacksonville, and I'd driven past that historic cemetery 1,000 times without giving it much thought. Gold Rush town, old headstones, the kind of picturesque decay that makes for good wedding backdrops. My grandmother used to cross herself whenever we passed it, muttering prayers in Spanish I was too young to understand. She'd grown up hearing stories from her grandmother about the old spirits that lingered in Oregon, carried down from the indigenous people who lived here before the miners came looking for gold and found graves instead. "Los espíritus antiguos no duermen," she'd whisper. The ancient spirits don't sleep. I should have listened. September 14th, 2024 started like any other wedding day. Christina Walsh and Michael Rivera had booked me for what they called their Gothic romantic ceremony at Jacksonville Historic Cemetery. The bride was a librarian with a fascination for Victorian mourning customs. The groom worked in tech but had always been drawn to Oregon's darker history. They'd found each other on a ghost tour and decided to get married where it all began. I arrived at 3 p.m. to set up, 2 hours before the ceremony. The cemetery sprawled across 5 acres of rolling hills, dotted with weathered headstones dating back to the 1850s. Miners, their wives, children who didn't survive their first winters. The newer section, where burials continued into the 1940s, was separated from the historic area by a rusted iron fence that had been there so long it looked like it had grown from the earth itself. My equipment felt heavier that day. 2 camera bodies, a Canon 5D Mark IV for the ceremony and a backup Mark III for portraits. Extra batteries, memory cards, a complete lighting kit for the reception. I'd been featured in Oregon Bride magazine 3 months earlier with a spread called Capturing Love in Unexpected Places. The Jacksonville wedding was going to be my follow-up feature, the shot that would establish me as the go-to photographer for alternative venues. The couple wanted the ceremony at sunset, when golden hour would cast everything in warm light, while the Gothic elements created dramatic shadows. Perfect for the aesthetic they were going for, terrible for what was already waiting there. I spent those 2 hours walking the grounds, finding the best angles, testing light conditions. The cemetery felt different than it had during my location scout the week before. Heavier. The air hung thick and still despite the September breeze stirring the oak trees. Birds that should have been chattering in the late afternoon were silent. As I worked, I started noticing things that hadn't been there during my initial visit. Fresh flowers on graves that looked like they hadn't been tended in decades. A child's pinwheel spinning in front of a headstone marked Baby Girl Miller, 1887, even though there was no wind. Small things, the kind of details that make a photographer's instincts prickle. I should have left then, should have called Christina and made up some excuse about equipment failure or family emergency. But I had a contract, a reputation, and bills that wouldn't pay themselves if I walked away from a $1,500 booking because I was spooked by cemetery atmosphere. The wedding party arrived at 5:30. Christina looked stunning in a black vintage gown with intricate beadwork that caught the dying light like stars. Michael wore a charcoal 3-piece suit with a burgundy bow tie that matched the dark red roses in Christina's bouquet. 38 guests, all dressed in deep purples, blacks and burgundy, scattered among the headstones like elegant crows. The officiant was Christina's college friend, a woman named Sarah, who specialized in non-traditional ceremonies. She'd researched the history of the cemetery for her opening remarks, speaking about how love persists, even in places touched by death, how couples throughout time had found beauty in honoring those who came before them. I moved through the ceremony like I always did, invisible but present, capturing candid moments. Christina's father wiping away tears during her vows, Michael's grandmother nodding approval from her wheelchair, the flower girl, Christina's 7-year-old niece, scattering black rose petals along the path between the headstones. Everything proceeded normally until the formal portraits began. I positioned Christina and Michael near a particularly photogenic cluster of 1800s graves, the warm light filtering through the oak canopy, creating natural spotlights on their faces. I raised my camera, adjusted my settings, and looked through the viewfinder to compose the shot. That's when I saw her for the first time. A woman stood 50 feet behind the couple, perfectly motionless among the headstones. Tall, maybe 6 feet, wearing dark clothing that looked like it belonged to another century. Long coat or dress, I couldn't tell from that distance, but the fabric seemed heavy, formal. Victorian mourning wear maybe, which fit the cemetery's period but seemed odd for a wedding guest. I lowered my camera to look with my naked eye, planning to politely ask her to step out of the frame. The space behind Christina and Michael was empty. Just weathered headstones and the iron fence separating the historic section from the newer graves. Confused, I raised the camera again. The woman was back, but closer now, 30 feet behind the couple. And her face. Even through the viewfinder, even at that distance, I could see that something was wrong with her proportions. Her face was too angular, too sharp. Her eyes seemed too large for her skull, dark and round like a bird's. Her nose wasn't quite a nose, too hooked, too pointed, more like a beak trying to be human. I kept the viewfinder pressed to my eye and took the shot anyway. The flash illuminated Christina and Michael's smiles, but I was watching the background. The woman didn't react to the flash at all, didn't blink, didn't move, just kept staring directly at my camera lens with those impossible eyes. I immediately checked the image on my camera's LCD screen. The woman was in the photo, crystal clear, standing directly behind Christina with one hand resting on the bride's shoulder. Christina showed no sign that anyone had touched her. I'd been watching her face the entire time. But there it was in the image, a pale hand with fingers too long and too thin pressed against the black beadwork of Christina's dress. The woman's face was even more disturbing in the photograph. Those oversized eyes had no whites, just black pupils that seemed to fill the entire socket. Her mouth was slightly open, revealing teeth that were too small and too sharp, like a bird's beak lined with thorns. I looked up from the camera screen. Christina and Michael were waiting patiently for my direction, completely oblivious to what I'd captured. "Did you feel anything just now?" I asked Christina. "Like someone touching your shoulder?" She reached back and brushed at her dress. "No, why? Is something wrong with my gown?" "No, everything's perfect. Let's try a few more angles." I kept shooting, but I couldn't stop checking every image on my camera screen. The woman appeared in 37 of the 400 photos I took that evening. Not in every shot, but in enough to establish a pattern. She was always in the background, always watching, and getting progressively closer to the couple with each sequential photograph. In the early shots, she stood among the distant headstones like another mourner. By the middle of the session, she was close enough that I could make out details of her clothing, layers of black fabric that looked handmade, stitched in patterns I didn't recognize. By the final formal portraits, she was standing directly between Christina and Michael, her face inches from theirs, but they clearly couldn't see her. The most disturbing image was the last one I captured. A candid shot of the couple walking to their car after the reception, laughing and holding hands as they headed toward their honeymoon. Through the rear window of their Honda Civic, clear as day, the woman sat in the back seat. Her head was turned toward the camera, those black eyes staring directly at me through the glass. I went home that night and started editing immediately. Sometimes wedding photographers catch odd things in the background, strangers walking by, animals, weird lighting effects. I told myself it was probably just a guest I hadn't noticed, someone in costume, who'd stepped away when I tried to look directly. But as I went through the images on my computer, the woman's presence became more unsettling. On my large monitor, I could see details that had been hidden in the camera's small screen. Her skin had a waxy, translucent quality like old candles. Her hair hung in long, straight lines that didn't move, despite the evening breeze I remembered rustling the oak leaves. And her clothes, what I'd thought was Victorian morning dress, was actually something much older, more primitive. Layered hides and woven materials decorated with patterns that hurt to look at too closely. I started researching Jacksonville's history. The cemetery held graves dating back to the town's founding in 1851, when gold miners flooded into the Rogue River Valley and displaced the native Takelma people who'd lived there for thousands of years. The Takelma had their own burial grounds in the area, sacred places that were plowed over and forgotten when the white settlers arrived looking for fortune in the hills. I found references to Takelma legends about death omens, spirits that appeared to mark those who were about to cross over to the next world. One story kept appearing in my searches: the Owl Woman, a spirit that took the form of a tall woman with bird-like features who appeared to those about to die or lose someone close to them. According to the legends, if Owl Woman appeared in your presence, someone you loved would die within 9 days. If she touched you, you would die. If she spoke to you, your entire family line would be cursed. I tried to dismiss it as folklore, but those photos kept drawing me back. Something about the woman's position in each image felt deliberate. She wasn't randomly appearing in the background. She was marking people. 2 days after the wedding, Michael Rivera died. The accident happened on Highway 238, the winding road between Jacksonville and Medford. According to the police report, Michael's car had simply veered off the road and hit a tree. No mechanical failure, no evidence of distraction or impairment. The investigating officer described it as though Michael had just stopped driving, like he'd forgotten how to control the vehicle. Christina called me the day after the funeral, her voice hollow and broken. "I need to see the photos," she said. "I need to see him happy. I need to remember him the way he was that day." I'd been dreading this call. How do you tell a grieving widow that something impossible appeared in her wedding photos? That there might be a supernatural explanation for her husband's death? I sent her a carefully edited gallery with the woman removed from every image. It took me 14 hours of meticulous Photoshop work, but I gave Christina the wedding photos she deserved. Beautiful images of love and joy with no hint of the death omen that had been documenting their last day together. 3 days later, Christina Walsh hanged herself in the bedroom she'd planned to share with Michael. At Christina's funeral, I sat in the back row and watched her family grieve for the second time in a week. Her mother looked like she'd aged 10 years. Her father stared at nothing with the expression of a man whose world had stopped making sense. Her sister gave a eulogy about how Christina had always been the strong one, the optimist, the person who believed love could conquer anything. I took one photo during the service, just one, using my phone, telling myself I needed documentation for insurance purposes or professional records. Some lie to justify the compulsion I was developing to capture these moments of loss. When I reviewed the image later, Owl Woman was there, standing next to Christina's casket with both hands placed on the polished wood, those black eyes staring directly at my camera lens. And for the first time, her mouth was open wider, revealing more of those needle-sharp teeth, almost like she was smiling. Over the following weeks, I tried to return to normal. I had other weddings to shoot, corporate events, family portraits. But Owl Woman started appearing in every photo I took. Not just at somber occasions, she showed up at birthday parties, graduation celebrations, business headshots. Always in the background, always watching, always with her hand touching someone in the frame. I started keeping detailed records, names, dates, locations, who Owl Woman had marked in each photo. 23 people in total, across 6 different events. By early October, 14 of them were dead. Car accidents, heart attacks, workplace incidents, Freak occurrences that made local news for their randomness and tragedy, all within 9 days of being photographed with Owl Woman's hand on them. I tried to warn the surviving 9 people, called them, sent messages, even showed up at their homes with printouts of the photos, pointing out the impossible figure they couldn't see with their own eyes. Most thought I was having a breakdown. Some threatened to call the police. Others just hung up and blocked my number. The rational part of my mind knew how I sounded. Crazy photographer claiming supernatural forces were killing her clients. But the evidence was undeniable. 14 people dead, 9 more marked for death, and me caught in the middle with a camera that had somehow become a window into something ancient and malevolent. I contacted Dr. Gerald Ramsey, an anthropologist at Southern Oregon University who specialized in local indigenous cultures. When I showed him the photos, his face went pale. "This is Owl Woman," he said quietly. "The Takelma Death Herald. I've heard the stories, but I've never seen this." He stared at my laptop screen with a mixture of fascination and horror. According to tribal tradition, Owl Woman doesn't just predict death, she facilitates it. She marks souls for harvesting. How do I stop it? Dr. Ramsey was quiet for a long time, scrolling through the images with increasing unease. "You don't stop it," he finally said. "You've become her photographer, her witness. She's using you to document the deaths before they happen, to create a record of her work. In Takelma belief, Owl Woman exists at the boundary between life and death. She needs someone in the living world to anchor her presence here. There has to be something I can do. The legends speak of a ritual. If you can photograph Owl Woman's true form, not as she appears to others, but as she really is, and destroy that image in sacred fire during a new moon, you might break the connection. But it requires her to manifest physically, not just appear in your photographs. And if you fail," he shook his head, "the stories say she'll drag you into the death realm with her." October 18th was the new moon. I drove back to Jacksonville Cemetery just before midnight, carrying my grandmother's old Polaroid camera, the same one she'd used to take family portraits before she'd warned me about spirits that never sleep. Film cameras can't be hacked, can't be manipulated by whatever force was controlling my digital equipment. If I was going to capture Owl Woman's true form, it had to be on genuine silver halide film. I positioned myself at Christina and Michael's graves, where this nightmare had begun. The cemetery felt different at night, alive in ways that daylight couldn't reveal. I could hear things moving between the headstones, footsteps that were too light to be human, whispers in languages that predated English by thousands of years. I waited. Midnight passed, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. My phone showed missed calls from my mother, who'd received that final impossible photo showing Owl Woman's hand on her head. According to the pattern, my mother had maybe 6 days left. At 2:47 a.m., the temperature dropped 20 degrees in less than a minute. My breath began forming clouds in air that had been warm just moments before. The whispers stopped. Even the night insects went silent. Then I heard the owl call. It started normal, the hoot of a great horned owl somewhere in the oak trees, but the sound stretched and distorted, becoming deeper, more resonant, until it vibrated in my chest like the lowest note of a church organ. The call went on for nearly a minute without pause, impossibly long for any living creature. When it finally stopped, Owl Woman was standing 20 feet in front of me. Not the distant figure from my photographs, but the true form Dr. Ramsey had described, 9 feet tall with proportions that hurt to comprehend. Her arms reached almost to the ground, ending in hands with 7 fingers each, all of them twice the length of human digits. Her legs bent backward like a bird's, ending in talons that dug furrows in the earth with each step. Her face was the worst part. What I'd thought was bird-like in the photos was actually something far more disturbing. A human skull that had been stretched and reshaped, eye sockets expanded to accommodate organs the size of tennis balls, jaw extended to house rows of needle-sharp teeth. Her skin was translucent white, revealing the dark network of veins underneath. The clothing I'd seen in the photographs was gone. Instead, her body was covered in what looked like hundreds of small bones threaded together with sinew. Finger bones, toe bones, pieces of rib cage from children and adults alike. A dress made from the remains of every person she'd ever marked for death. She moved toward me with a gait that defied anatomy, each step covering impossible distance. I raised the Polaroid with shaking hands. She stopped 10 feet away and spoke for the first time. "You see me?" she said, and her voice was the sound of wind through open graves. "You document my work. You are mine now." I pressed the shutter. The flash went off. Owl Woman screamed, not with her mouth, but with her entire body. The sound shattered every piece of glass in the nearby mausoleums. Car alarms went off in the parking lot a quarter-mile away. I felt something warm running from my ears and realized I was bleeding. The Polaroid ejected and I grabbed it as Owl Woman lunged forward, those 7-fingered hands reaching for my throat. I ran toward my car, where I'd prepared everything Dr. Ramsey had described: a portable fire pit, sacred woods stolen from a Takelma cultural center, matches blessed by a priest who didn't ask too many questions. I started the fire as the photo developed, watching Owl Woman's true form slowly appear on the white square of film. Behind me, I could hear her approaching, heavy footsteps that sounded like tree limbs breaking, that impossible scream continuing without pause. When the image finished developing, I threw it into the flames. The photograph ignited like magnesium, burning so bright I had to shield my eyes. The fire roared upward, easily 20 feet high, flames shifting from white to blue to colors I didn't have names for. Owl Woman's scream became deafening, then began to weaken, then faded to the normal night sounds of a cemetery at rest. When the fire died, there was no ash. The photo hadn't burned. It had been unmade, erased from reality itself. I turned around. Owl Woman was gone. October 19th, I woke up in my car as the sun rose over Jacksonville Cemetery. My Polaroid camera had aged decades in a single night, crumbling to rust-covered metal and brittle plastic. My phone was back to normal. No impossible photos, no supernatural gallery additions. I called my mother. She was fine, confused about why I was crying with relief. The 9 people still on Owl Woman's list had survived the night. The curse was broken, but 14 people remained dead. My actions had saved 9 lives, but couldn't restore the ones already taken. Christina, Michael, my sister Rebecca, my childhood friend Marcus, they were gone forever. Because I'd picked up a camera at the wrong moment and seen something I was never meant to see. I tried to return to photography, but every time I looked through a viewfinder, I saw their faces. Panic attacks, night terrors, an inability to focus on anything except the guilt that followed me everywhere I went. I closed my business, lost my house, filed for bankruptcy. The guilt was the worst part. If I'd acted faster, if I'd figured out the pattern sooner, if I'd never taken that first photo at the wedding, the what-ifs circled endlessly. Rebecca had been planning to visit the following week. I could have warned her, could have kept her away from me until I'd resolved the curse. Instead, she died in a car accident 3 days after Owl Woman marked her, leaving behind a husband and 2 children who still ask why Aunt Melissa doesn't come to family gatherings anymore. I started working at a coffee shop in Medford, far enough from Jacksonville to avoid the memories but close enough to my mother in case she needed me. Minimum wage, health insurance I couldn't afford, customers who treated me like furniture. But I was alive, and the 9 people I'd saved were alive, and that had to be enough. For 8 months, I thought it was over. Then last week, a customer asked me to take a photo of her latte for her Instagram account. Something about the foam art reminding her of her late grandmother. I reluctantly agreed, figuring one snapshot with an iPhone couldn't hurt. When she posted the photo online, I saw it shared in a local community group on Facebook. There was a figure in the background I hadn't noticed while taking the picture. Not Owl Woman, something different. A man wearing animal hides and antlers, face painted white with black streaks down his cheeks like tears. He was standing behind the customer with both hands on her shoulders. 3 days later, she died in a hiking accident. Fell from a cliff on the Rogue River Trail, a path she'd walked hundreds of times. I researched the image and found references to Weeping Elk Man, another Takelma death spirit, one who marked souls during times of great sorrow or transition. Different from Owl Woman, but serving the same cosmic function. That's when I understood the horrible truth. By destroying Owl Woman, I hadn't ended the curse. I'd simply created a vacancy in the natural order. Death omen spirits aren't supernatural afflictions. They're positions, roles that must be filled to maintain the balance between life and death. Indigenous cultures understood this. They knew these spirits were necessary, inevitable, part of the cosmic machinery that keeps the world turning. Weeping Elk Man operates on a faster timeline than Owl Woman. 3 days instead of 9. More frequent deaths, less time to warn people, less time to say goodbye. And he doesn't limit himself to people I photograph directly. Like Owl Woman toward the end, Weeping Elk Man takes his own pictures, using my devices, marking people I care about, delivering impossible images to document their approaching deaths. Since March, 11 more people have died. Co-workers, neighbors, casual acquaintances, anyone I've shown kindness to, anyone I've allowed myself to care about becomes a target. I've isolated myself completely now. I live alone, work alone, speak to no one beyond basic customer service interactions, because caring about someone puts them on Weeping Elk Man's list. I've seen him now, standing at the edge of my vision when I'm alone, tall and gaunt, wearing a skull headdress made from the bones of extinct elk species, face painted for perpetual mourning. He watches me with ancient patience, waiting for me to slip up, to let someone get close enough to matter. The coffee shop manager has been asking if I'm okay. She's noticed I've become withdrawn, that I flinch when customers try to engage in friendly conversation. Yesterday, she offered to cover my health insurance out of her own pocket because she was worried about my mental state. Last night, I found a Polaroid under my apartment door. The manager sitting at her kitchen table with Weeping Elk Man's painted hands resting on her shoulders. She has 2 days left, maybe 3. I could quit, move to another city, start over. But Weeping Elk Man would follow. The role of death photographer is mine now, passed down through spiritual succession, and it can't be abandoned. I could try to destroy Weeping Elk Man like I destroyed Owl Woman, but Dr. Ramsey's research showed that each successive death spirit becomes stronger, harder to banish. And what replaces Weeping Elk Man? Something even worse? Something with a one-day timeline, or something that kills instantly? Better the devil you know. The truth is, some curses can't be broken because they're not really curses. They're jobs, cosmic positions that someone has to fill. I am the death photographer now, documenting souls marked for harvesting, creating records of transitions from life to whatever comes after. It's terrible work, but it's necessary work. Someone has to witness these moments. Someone has to remember. My grandmother understood this, I think. Why she crossed herself when we passed the cemetery. Why she warned me about spirits that never sleep. She knew that some family lines carry certain sensitivities, certain obligations. The dead don't rest peacefully without witnesses to mark their passing. I'll do this job for as long as I'm able, documenting deaths and keeping the cosmic machinery turning. I'll live alone, love no one, protect others by maintaining emotional distance. It's a small price to pay for the balance of the universe. The last photo on my phone, taken by Weeping Elk Man while I slept, shows both of us reflected in my bathroom mirror. Him standing behind me, hands on my shoulders, his painted skull face next to mine. Both of us staring at the camera with the patience of eternal servants. The caption beneath reads, "Death's photographer." My grandmother was right. Los espíritus antiguos no duermen. The ancient spirits don't sleep. And neither anymore do I. My name is Gabriel Santos, and I've been a water systems engineer for the Oregon Water Resources Department for 18 years. Before that, I spent 4 years in the Army Corps of Engineers doing dam inspections and flood control. I know water, how it moves, how it kills, how it hides its secrets under calm surfaces. I've walked every major dam from the Columbia River to Crater Lake, checked spillways in 100-year floods, and rappelled down concrete faces that would make most people piss themselves just looking over the edge. But nothing in my training prepared me for what lives in the water near Forked Mountain. I should explain what I do. When people turn on their taps in Portland or Salem, they don't think about the 300-mile network of dams, reservoirs and monitoring stations that make clean water possible. That's my job. I inspect the concrete, check the electronics, monitor water levels and quality, and make sure nothing's going wrong that could flood half the Willamette Valley. It's technical work, but it's also life or death work. One dam failure can kill thousands of people downstream in minutes. The assignment that changed my life came from my supervisor, Janet Chen, on November 8, 2024. Gabriel, I need you to inspect the Forked Mountain monitoring station. We're getting weird readings. Water temperature spikes, dissolved oxygen dropping, pH fluctuations. Could be equipment failure, could be algae bloom, could be industrial runoff. Whatever it is, find it and fix it. Forked Mountain Station monitors a network of small lakes and tributaries about 15 miles west of Forest Grove. It's remote, no cell service, no roads, except logging tracks, dense, old-growth forest that hasn't been touched by clear-cutting, the kind of place where you're alone with just trees and water, and whatever lives in between. I should have paid attention to the local warnings. At the Forest Grove Ranger Station, I stopped to get current trail maps and check fire conditions. The ranger on duty was Tom Whitehorse, a soft-spoken man in his 50s with Kalapuya ancestry and 30 years of experience in those forests. "You going alone to Forked Mountain?" he asked when I told him my destination. "Just a routine inspection. Water quality sensors are acting up." Tom's expression darkened. "That area's been having problems. Hikers reporting disorientation, equipment malfunctions. Had to do 3 search and rescue operations this year. People going missing for days, found later with no memory of where they'd been. And the animals? What about the animals? They avoid that whole drainage now. No deer tracks, no bird songs, no insects. It's like the forest just went quiet 6 months ago. My grandmother's people called that Lake Umhuluk Pacha the drowning place. There's old stories about something in the water that takes people." I thanked him for the warning, but didn't take it seriously. I'm a scientist. I believe in data, not folklore. If animals were avoiding the area, there was probably a chemical contamination issue. That's exactly what I was there to investigate. The 2-hour hike to the monitoring station followed an old logging road that gradually narrowed to a deer trail through Douglas fir and western cedar. The forest was unusually quiet. Tom was right about that. No bird calls, no insect buzz, just the sound of my footsteps on wet leaves. But forests go quiet sometimes. Weather changes, seasonal migrations, any number of natural factors. The monitoring station sits on the north shore of an unnamed lake, maybe 200 acres of dark water surrounded by steep hills. The equipment cabin is solar-powered, about the size of a small garage, containing water sensors, telemetry equipment, backup batteries, and basic supplies for overnight stays. Everything looked normal from the outside. The inside told a different story. My laptop connected to the monitoring system immediately, and the data download painted a disturbing picture. Water temperature had spiked to 78 degrees 3 days ago, impossible for November in Oregon mountains. pH had swung from normal 7.2 to acidic 4.8 overnight, then back to normal. Dissolved oxygen had crashed to near zero levels for 6 hours, killing any fish in the lake, then mysteriously recovered. But the most troubling data came from the depth sonar. The lake was mapped at 85 feet maximum depth in 1987. According to my instruments, the center of the lake was now reading 340 feet deep. Either the bottom had dropped 250 feet, geologically impossible without a massive earthquake, or something very large was sitting on the lake floor, displacing enough water to confuse the sonar. I ran diagnostics on every sensor, everything checked out. The equipment was working perfectly, which meant the impossible readings were real. I decided to take water samples at different depths using my portable testing kit. The boat launch was a small wooden dock about 30 yards from the cabin. I inflated my emergency raft, a 2-person kayak I'd brought for deep water sampling, and paddled toward the center of the lake. The water was unnaturally still. No wind ripples, no movement, except the wake from my paddle. As I got further from shore, the silence became oppressive. Even my paddle strokes seemed muffled, as if the sound was being absorbed by something in the water. At the center of the lake, I deployed my sampling line. 50 feet down, the water was normal temperature and chemistry. At 100 feet, where the bottom should have been, the line kept dropping. 150 feet, 200 feet, 250 feet. At 300 feet, something grabbed my sampling line. Not snagged, grabbed. The line went taut with a deliberate jerk, like a fish striking bait, but much stronger. Then whatever had it started pulling, not just pulling, but testing, small tugs at different angles, as if something intelligent was examining the equipment. I tried to reel in the line. It wouldn't budge. The force holding it was immense, like trying to pull a car with fishing line. Then, without warning, the line went slack. I reeled it in rapidly, afraid of losing my equipment. The sample bottle came up empty and crushed, not just compressed by water pressure, but physically crushed by something with incredible grip strength. The metal collection tube was bent into a perfect spiral, as if something with fingers had twisted it like taffy. That's when I heard the voice, D-Day, D-Day, D-Day. A child's voice, speaking words I didn't recognize, coming from directly below my boat. I looked down into the water and saw a pale shape, maybe 20 feet down, too deep and too distorted by water to make out clearly, but definitely human-sized. "Hello?" I called out, feeling ridiculous. "Are you okay?" D-Day, D-Day, D-Day. The voice was clearer now, definitely a young child, maybe 8 or 9 years old, but there was something wrong with the tone, flat, emotionless, like an echo of speech rather than actual communication. I grabbed my emergency diving mask and looked underwater. What I saw made my blood freeze. It was a child, a Native American boy in traditional clothing, standing on the lake bottom 300 feet below me. He was perfectly visible despite the impossible depth and darkness, as if he was illuminated by some internal light. His mouth was moving, saying the same words over and over. D-Day! 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 but he wasn't alone. Two more children stood beside him, a girl about the same age and another boy. All three were impaled through their chests by enormous horns like decorations on some invisible creature's head. Blood drifted around them in the water, but their wounds never emptied, never healed. "D-Day, D-Day, D-Day," they said in unison. "We have changed our bodies." I jerked my head out of the water, hyperventilating. Hallucination, nitrogen narcosis, equipment reflection, any explanation except what I'd just seen. I started paddling back toward shore as fast as I could. Behind me, the lake began to churn. I didn't look back, couldn't look back. But I could hear water moving in ways that water doesn't move naturally. Heavy, deliberate splashing. Something large, surfacing, breathing, watching me retreat. The entire lake was rocking with waves that had no visible source. I reached the dock, dragged my raft onto shore, and ran for the monitoring station. Once inside, I locked the door and tried to call my supervisor on the satellite phone. Static. The radio was dead. My cell phone showed no signal, which was normal for this area, but even the emergency beacon wasn't connecting. I was completely isolated. Through the cabin windows, I could see the lake. It was still churning, but now I could make out shapes in the water, massive coils breaking the surface as thick as tree trunks and covered in spotted fur. Whatever was down there was huge, and it was coming closer to shore. I reviewed the historical data on my laptop, looking for any mention of similar anomalies. What I found in the archived geological survey files made everything worse. In 1987, the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife had investigated reports of missing hikers in this area. 3 separate incident reports, all involving families with children who disappeared near the lake and were found days later with no memory of what had happened. In each case, the children showed signs of prolonged submersion, wrinkled skin, water in their lungs, but were somehow alive and unharmed. The investigation was closed after a month with no conclusions, but the lead investigator, Dr. Maria Gonzalez, had included an addendum based on interviews with local Kalapuya tribal members. The Kalapuya have traditional stories about this lake that may be relevant to the missing persons cases. According to tribal historian Joseph Whitehorse, there is a creature called Amhuluk that lives in this specific body of water. The creature is described as a large, spotted animal with 4 legs and prominent horns. It allegedly drowns anything it encounters, keeping the bodies or spirits in the lake. Children who approach the water are said to be particularly vulnerable. While these accounts have no scientific basis, the consistency of the folklore with our incident reports is noteworthy. Dr. Gonzalez had died in a car accident in 1989, but her notes included detailed interviews with tribal members. According to the folklore, Amhuluk had originally tried to live in the Atfalati Plains, but found them too small for his massive size. He'd moved to this remote lake and claimed it as his territory, drowning any living thing he encountered. The creature was said to be associated with disease, fog, and the corruption of natural water. But the most disturbing part of the folklore was what happened to his victims. They weren't just killed, they were transformed into something else. Their bodies were kept in the lake, and their spirits were bound to serve Amhuluk, calling other victims into the water with their voices. Dide, Dide, Dide meant, "We have changed our bodies," in the old Kalapuya language. As I read this, fog began rising from the lake outside. Not ordinary fog, it moved with purpose, flowing uphill toward the monitoring station like something alive. Through the windows, I could see the shapes in the water getting larger, closer. Whatever lived in that lake knew I was here, and it was coming for me. The temperature in the cabin began dropping rapidly. My breath fogged in the suddenly frigid air. The electronic equipment started malfunctioning, screens flickering, sensors giving impossible readings, the satellite uplink chattering with static that sounded almost like voices. Then the power went out. In the darkness, I heard something massive pulling itself onto the dock. Wet, dragging sounds, like a beached whale trying to move on land. But this moved with intelligence, purpose. Heavy footsteps approached the cabin, each one making the entire structure shake. Through the window, I saw it clearly for the first time. Amuluk was enormous, easily 20 feet long, with the build of a massive bear but covered in spotted fur that seemed to shift and flow like water. Its 4 legs were hairless and muscular, ending in webbed claws that could crush concrete. But the most terrifying features were its horns. 2 enormous spiral projections from its skull, each one piercing the bodies of multiple children who hung there like grotesque trophies. The children were still alive, or whatever passed for alive in Amuluk's domain. They turned their heads to look at me through the window, their eyes reflecting light that shouldn't have existed in the complete darkness. "Dide, Dide, Dide," they whispered in unison. "Come to the water, join us. We have changed our bodies." Amhuluk's massive head turned toward the cabin. Its eyes were intelligent, ancient, hungry. When it spoke, its voice was like water flowing over rocks, beautiful and deadly. "Engineer," it said in perfect English, "you have tested my domain. You have seen my children. Now you must choose." "Choose what?" I managed to say. "Join them willingly, and you will serve with purpose, helping me maintain the balance of these waters, calling others to their transformation when the time is right. Resist, and I will take you anyway, but you will serve in suffering, impaled, and aware for centuries." I looked at the children on its horns. They nodded encouragingly, as if being skewered by a lake monster was a privilege I should appreciate. "There is another option," Amuluk continued. "You are an engineer. You understand water systems, flow dynamics, pressure calculations. I need someone with your skills to help me expand my territory. The Willamette River connects to this lake through underground channels. Portland gets its water from the Willamette. Imagine what I could accomplish with access to a city's water supply." The full horror of what it was suggesting hit me. Amuluk wasn't just a local predator. It was planning to contaminate Portland's drinking water, potentially affecting 500,000 people. Whatever supernatural influence it had over water could be transmitted through the entire municipal system. "Help me engineer this expansion," it said, "and I will spare the children. They have suffered enough. But I will need new servants, adults with technical knowledge, adults like you." "And if I refuse?" Amuluk's eyes glowed brighter. "Then I take Portland anyway, but less efficiently. More people die, more children suffer, and you join them conscious and impaled, watching it happen for eternity." I thought about my ex-wife Carmen and our kids in Portland, drinking tap water. That could become a supernatural transmission vector. I thought about the children on Amhuluk's horns, who had probably faced this same impossible choice decades ago. I thought about my duty as an engineer to protect public water systems. "I need time to think," I said. "You have until sunrise," Amhuluk replied. "Then you choose, or I choose for you." The creature slipped back into the lake, taking the impaled children with it. But I could see them floating just below the surface, watching the cabin, making sure I didn't try to escape. I spent the night developing a plan. My emergency equipment included 10 pounds of industrial water treatment chemicals, chlorine compounds designed to neutralize biological contamination. If I could get them into the lake at sufficient concentration, it might harm Amhuluk, or at least force it to retreat. But I'd need to get close to the water to deploy them effectively. At dawn, I made my decision. I carried the chemical containers down to the dock, making it look like I was surrendering. Amhuluk rose from the depths, the children still impaled on its horns, watching me with their dead eyes. "Your choice, engineer?" it asked. "I'll help you," I said. "But first I need to run some water quality tests to understand how your influence spreads through different pH levels." It was a calculated risk. Would a centuries-old lake monster understand modern water chemistry well enough to spot my deception? Apparently not. Amhuluk nodded approvingly as I began mixing chemical solutions near the water's edge. "Wise choice. The children are pleased you will join them willingly. The transformation is much easier when you don't fight it." The moment Amhuluk moved close enough, I dumped all 10 pounds of concentrated chlorine solution directly into the water around its head. The effect was immediate and horrifying. Amhuluk reared back with a sound like a steam engine exploding, thrashing in the water as the chemicals burned its spotted hide. But instead of retreating, it became enraged. "Fool!" it roared, lunging toward the dock with claws extended. "Now you die slowly, and your city dies with you." I ran for the monitoring station, but I could hear Amhuluk dragging itself onto land behind me. Its massive bulk could move frighteningly fast when motivated. I reached the cabin just as its claws raked across the door, splintering the wood. Inside, I activated the emergency beacon and prayed someone would receive the signal. Then I did the only thing I could think of. I began systematically destroying the monitoring equipment, making sure no data about the lake's depth or Amhuluk's presence would survive if I didn't. Amhuluk smashed through the cabin wall like it was paper. Up close, its size was overwhelming. Its head alone was larger than my entire body. The children on its horns looked at me sadly, as if disappointed I'd chosen the hard way. "You will suffer for
this insult," Amhuluk snarled. "But first, watch your city burn." That's when the helicopters arrived. The emergency beacon had worked. Oregon National Guard Search and Rescue had tracked my signal and dispatched 2 helicopters when they couldn't reach me by radio. They arrived just as Amhuluk was preparing to impale me on its horns alongside the children. The spotlights and rotor noise confused the creature for crucial seconds. I ran for the open door of the cabin as the rescue team rappelled down from the helicopters. Their leader was Sergeant Rebecca Park, a National Guard medic I'd worked with on previous flood emergency responses. "Gabriel, what the hell is that thing?" "Lake monster," I shouted over the rotor noise. "Don't let it get back in the water." The guard team opened fire with 50 caliber weapons, but the bullets barely penetrated Amhuluk's spotted hide. The creature roared in anger rather than pain and began retreating toward the lake, still carrying the children on its horns. "It's getting away," Park yelled. I grabbed my remaining chemical supplies, emergency flare compounds and water purification tablets, and mixed them into an improvised incendiary device. "Keep it out of the water for 30 seconds. The helicopters strafed Amhuluk with everything they had: machine guns, flares, even a rocket that left a smoking crater where it hit. None of it seriously injured the creature, but it delayed its retreat long enough for me to reach the water's edge. I threw my improvised chemical bomb directly at Amhuluk's head just as it entered the lake. The explosion wasn't large, but the chemical mixture created a cloud of chlorine gas that reacted violently with whatever supernatural properties the water possessed. Amhuluk screamed, not an animal sound, but something that shattered the windows of the monitoring station half a mile away. It thrashed in the burning water, its spotted hide dissolving where the chemicals touched it. Most horrifically, the children impaled on its horns began to speak. "Father, Father, we are free! We remember our names!" One by one, the children slipped off Amhuluk's dissolving horns and sank into the water, but peacefully, gratefully. as if they were finally allowed to rest. The last thing I heard was a young girl's voice saying thank you before she disappeared beneath the surface. Amhuluk itself sank into the depths, its massive body dissolving like salt in water. The lake began to clear from the supernatural murkiness that had clouded it, returning to normal Oregon mountain lake conditions. Within hours, the water testing showed normal pH, normal temperature, normal depth. Whatever had been living in that lake was gone. But the story didn't end there. Over the next 6 months, the Oregon Water Resources Department conducted extensive testing of every water system connected to the forked mountain drainage. What we found was disturbing: trace amounts of an unknown organic compound in groundwater throughout the western Willamette Valley. Not enough to be toxic, but enough to suggest that Amhuluk's influence had already begun spreading through the aquifer system. We implemented a systematic treatment protocol, industrial-grade chlorination of every water processing facility in the region. Officially, we called it a precautionary response to possible algae contamination. Unofficially, we were purging any remaining supernatural influence from the water supply that serves Portland, Salem, and a dozen smaller cities. It worked. Water quality returned to normal within 3 months. No more strange readings, no more temperature spikes, no more impossible depth measurements. But there were consequences. My supervisor, Janet Chen, was found dead in her office 2 weeks after the incident. Apparently a heart attack, though she was only 45 and in perfect health. The official autopsy found salt water in her lungs despite her having drowned in her own chair, hundreds of miles from any ocean. Sergeant Park, who led the rescue team, requested transfer to desert postings in Arizona. "I can't be around large bodies of water anymore," she told me. "I hear voices calling from every lake, every river, children's voices." As for me, I was quietly transferred to eastern Oregon, high desert country, where the biggest body of water is a cattle pond. Officially, it was a promotion. Unofficially, the state wanted me far away from any major water systems. I still do water testing, but only for irrigation systems and municipal wells, nothing deep, nothing connected to the old drainage systems that feed into the Willamette River. Because even now, 3 years later, I sometimes hear them when I'm near moving water, the children's voices. "Diday, diday, diday, we have changed our bodies." They're not calling people to drown anymore. They're trying to warn them. The children that Amhuluk held captive for decades are still there in the water systems, but now they're protectors instead of lures. When someone's about to fall into a river, when a swimmer gets in over their head, when a boat is heading for dangerous rapids, sometimes people report hearing children's voices telling them to get out of the water. The children are free now, but they're still serving, still protecting, still changing bodies. But now they're changing from victims to guardians. Last month, I received a letter from Tom Whitehorse at the Forest Grove Ranger Station. "Gabriel, thought you should know. Tribal Council officially designated the Forked Mountain Lake as a sacred site. We're performing traditional cleansing ceremonies there every month. The elders say the children's spirits are at peace now, but they've chosen to stay and guard the waters. They say you gave them that choice and they're grateful. My grandmother always said the old stories are true. But sometimes they can have happy endings if the right person stands up when it matters. Thank you for being that person." The right person, I'm not sure about that. I was just an engineer doing his job, trying to protect the public water supply, but sometimes that's all it takes. Someone willing to face the impossible and do what needs to be done, even when the cost is higher than anyone should have to pay. The water in Oregon is safe now. The children are free. Amhuluk is gone. But every time I turn on a tap, every time I hear water moving through pipes,
I remember what lives in the depths of our world, what watches from beneath the surface, what waits in the places we've forgotten to fear. The old legends are true, all of them. They're warnings passed down through generations, telling us to respect the powers that shaped this land long before we arrived. The Kalapuya knew about Amhuluk for centuries, but nobody listened to their stories until it was almost too late. Now I listen. Now I know that every lake, every river, every body of water has its guardians and its monsters. Most of the guardians are winning, most of the time, but not always, and not everywhere. The children's voices still call out from the waters of Oregon, warning people away from danger. If you're ever near a lake or river and you hear them, diday, 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 listen to them. They know the water better than anyone. They've changed their bodies, but not their hearts. They're still protecting us, one warning at a time. My name is Zara Patel, and I've been working at the Carnegie Library in Ashland, Oregon for 3 years. I'm a part-time library assistant, 20 hours a week shelving books, running the checkout desk, and helping with children's programs. I also work part-time at a local bookstore to pay rent. Not exactly the career I planned with my English degree, but the job market is tough, and I love books. I love helping kids find stories that make them smile. What happened in February 2025 taught me that some stories should never be told, some legends should stay buried, and some children should never come home. The Carnegie Library sits on cursed ground. I didn't know that when I started working there. Nobody tells you these things during orientation. Ashland was built on what the Takelma people called Yahya Hashkeni, the hungry place. Long before white settlers arrived, the Takelma avoided this area around certain times of year. The mineral springs weren't considered healing waters, they were spirit traps, places where the boundary between worlds grew thin and dangerous. According to tribal elder Mary Running Bear, who I met later, the springs were created by Skahok, a powerful spirit that fed on life energy. The Takelma knew that children were especially vulnerable here. Their life force burned brighter, lasted longer when consumed. That's why they posted warnings, performed protective ceremonies, and never let children play near the springs unsupervised. The white settlers ignored these warnings. They built their town right on top of the spirit trap, turned the sacred springs into a tourist attraction, and called the native warnings superstition. In 1883, 6 children paid the price. February the 4th was a Tuesday, cold and grey like most winter days in southern Oregon. I was working the closing shift, which meant staying until 6 p.m. to do final shelving and lock up. The head librarian, Mrs. Chen, had left at 5:30. Her great-great-grandmother was Margaret Chen, one of the missing children from 1883, a family tragedy that led to her ancestors staying in Ashland, hoping their lost daughter might somehow return. The last patron, an elderly Takelma man I'd never seen before, had shuffled out around 5:20. But as he left, he stopped at my desk and said something that made my skin crawl. The children are restless tonight. The hungry place is waking up. Be careful, young woman. I thought he was just being dramatic. Old people say weird things sometimes. I was in the children's section shelving the last cart of returns when I heard it, not just laughter, the specific sound of children playing katashum, an ancient Takelma circle game that was supposed to bind spirits to the physical world. I knew the game because my college Native American Studies professor had mentioned it as an example of how innocent children's activities could have deeper spiritual significance. The laughter sounded wrong. Too many voices overlapping, too much echo, like it was coming from underground. And the rhythm was off. Too fast, too frantic, like children playing desperately rather than joyfully. I walked toward the reading nook, my footsteps echoing on the old wooden floors. "Hello, library's closed. You need to come out now." As I got closer, I could hear the words of the Katasham chant, but spoken in English with a strange accent. Round and round the spirit goes, where it stops, the hungry knows. Give your warmth and give your breath, play with us until your death. That's when I saw them. 5 shadow children on the wall, but they weren't just shadows anymore. I could see through them to the wall behind, but they had substance, detail, faces. They were wearing 1880s clothing, holding hands in a circle, spinning faster and faster. And their faces, God, their faces were desperate, hungry, pleading. But here's what made my blood freeze. They cast shadows of their own. Shadow children casting shadows, creating infinite dark reflections stretching across the wall like a tunnel into nothing. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam passed right through them, but they didn't disappear. Instead, they became more solid, as if the light was feeding them somehow. The smallest one, a little girl maybe 4 years old, broke from the circle and approached me. Her eyes were hollow, but I could see intelligence there and terrible hunger. "Help us," she whispered, her voice layering with the others until it became a chorus. "We've been playing so long. We're so tired, so hungry. The spirit won't let us stop." I reached toward her without thinking. The moment our hands touched, pain shot through my arm like frostbite and electric shock combined. She was drawing something from me, warmth, energy, life, and it felt good and terrible at the same time. When I pulled away, my hand was wrinkled and pale. I'd aged 5 years in 5 seconds. That night, I called my old professor, Dr. Sarah Crow Feather, a Takelma tribal member who specialized in Pacific Northwest indigenous spirituality. When I described what I'd seen, the silence on the phone lasted so long, I thought she'd hung up. "Zara," she finally said, "you need to stay away from that library. What you're describing, it's Skark's children. In 1883, 6 white children were playing near the springs during Yamekam, the time when the spirit world is closest to ours. Skark took them, but instead of consuming them immediately, it trapped them in the Katasham game to feed slowly on their life energy for decades." "But they're just children," I protested. "They seem scared, not dangerous." "They are scared. They've been playing the same binding game for 142 years, slowly starving while Skark feeds on them. But here's what you don't understand. They're not trying to escape anymore. They're trying to recruit. The game requires fresh players."
To continue, living children, to replace the ones who finally burn out. Replace them how? By convincing a living person to join the game voluntarily. The victim has to choose to help, to sacrifice themselves. That's how the binding works. Free will is required. I should have listened to Dr. Crowfeather. I should have quit my job, moved to another state, never looked back. Instead, I went back to the library the next night. The children were waiting for me. This time, they were more solid, more real. I could see their individual faces clearly. Emma Whitfield, age 5, blonde curls and a white dress, stained with something dark around the hem. Her eyes held the exhausted wisdom of someone far older. Thomas Whitfield, aged 12, Emma's big brother, wearing knickers and a wool vest. His face was gaunt, aged by hunger and desperation. Sophie and Samuel Morrison, 8-year-old twins with matching brown hair and hollow cheeks. They held hands constantly, as if afraid of losing each other again. Margaret Chen, aged 10, wearing a blue dress with a torn sleeve. She looked just like Mrs. Chen, but wrong somehow. Too thin, too pale, too hungry. "You came back," Emma said, her voice clearer now, but still layered with echoes. "We knew you would. You're kind. You want to help." "I do want to help," I said carefully. "But I need to understand what's happening to you." Thomas stepped forward. "We've been playing the circle game since 1883. The hungry spirit feeds on us, but we never die completely.
We just get weaker and weaker, more and more tired. But the game has to continue, or we disappear forever. What do you need from me? Emma smiled, and for the first time, she looked genuinely happy. Someone new to play with us, just once. You just have to join our circle, hold our hands and play the game. Then you can go home, and we can finally rest. I almost said yes. Looking at their desperate, hopeful faces, I almost stepped forward and took their hands. But something Dr. Crowfeather had said nagged at me. The victim has to choose to help voluntarily. What happens to me if I play your game? The children exchanged glances. Margaret spoke up. You'll become like us, between worlds, feeding the hungry spirit. But you'll have friends and we can finally stop. Forever? Sophie whispered. Nothing is forever. When you get too weak, too tired, you'll need someone new to join the game. That's how it works. That's when I understood the true horror. This wasn't about saving trapped children. This was about perpetuating an endless cycle. Skark had created a supernatural pyramid scheme where each generation of victims had to recruit the next to survive. How many people have joined your game since 1883? I asked. Thomas looked ashamed. 17. The last one was in 1987, a janitor who worked here at night. He felt sorry for us. What happened to him? Emma pointed to a corner of the reading nook I'd never paid attention to. There was a sixth shadow there, an adult-shaped one, barely visible, moving so slowly it seemed almost still. He's almost gone now, she said sadly. Fed Skark for 38 years. Soon he'll disappear completely and we'll need someone new. I backed away, but the children followed, their forms becoming more solid with each step I took away from them. Please, Emma begged. We don't want to hurt anyone. We just want the pain to stop. We've been hungry for so long. There has to be another way. Margaret shook her head. The only way to break the game is to destroy the spirit trap. But that would require... She looked at her fellow players. It would require someone to stay behind voluntarily while the others escaped. Someone to keep Skjalduk distracted while the thin place is sealed. How do you seal a spirit trap? Thomas smiled grimly. Salt, sage, iron, and the willing sacrifice of someone with strong life energy. The Tekelma knew how to do it, but all their shamans are gone now. That night, I called Dr. Crowfeather again. When I told her what I'd learned, she was quiet for a long time. There is a way, she finally said, but it's not just dangerous, it's almost certainly fatal for whoever attempts it. The ritual requires someone to enter the spirit trap consciously, confront Skark directly, and hold its attention while the sacred boundaries are restored. The Tekelma used to train for years to attempt such a thing, and most died trying. But it would free the children, all of them, permanently? If it worked, yes. The spirit trap would be sealed. Skark would be banished to the deep spirit world, and any souls it had captured would be released to continue to the afterlife. But Zara, her voice was stern. You're not trained for this. You're not Tekelma. You don't have the spiritual protection our ancestors used. If you tried this ritual, you would almost certainly die. But the children would be free? Yes, they could finally rest. I made my decision that night. On February 21st, I met Dr. Crowfeather at the library after midnight. She'd brought supplies, rock salt from the sacred caves, dried sage from Mount Shasta, and iron nails from a 19th century Tekelma settlement. She'd also brought something else, a leather pouch, filled with what looked like small bones. My great-grandmother's protection charm, she explained. It won't save you, but it might give you a few extra minutes to complete the ritual. The children were waiting in the reading nook, more solid than ever. When they saw Dr. Crowfeather, they recoiled. She knows the old ways, Emma whispered fearfully. She can hurt us. I'm not here to hurt you, Dr. Crowfeather said gently in Takelma, then switched to English. I'm here to help you find peace. She began setting up the ritual circle, placing iron nails at specific points around the reading nook, sprinkling salt in complex patterns, burning sage until the air was thick with smoke. As she worked, she chanted in Takelma, words I didn't understand but could feel in my bones. The circle is ready, she said, but remember, once you enter, Skark will know what you're trying to do. It will fight you, try to break your will, offer you anything to stop the ritual. You cannot listen. You cannot waver. Just keep holding the center of the circle until I finish the sealing chant. I stepped into the circle. The world exploded into cold and hunger and rage. Skark was massive, ancient, made of starving void and endless appetite. It rushed into my mind like a freezing flood, showing me visions of everyone it had consumed over the centuries, not just the children, but hundreds of others, Native Americans who'd wandered too close to the springs, early settlers, travelers, anyone with strong life energy. You cannot stop me, it roared inside my skull. I have fed here for 10,000 years. I will feed for 10,000 more. The children, I gasped, focusing on Emma's desperate face. Let them go. Join them instead. Play the eternal game. I will give you power, knowledge, immortality. All I ask is occasional sustenance, a fair trade. I could feel my life draining away, my vision blurring, my heart struggling to beat. But I could also hear Dr. Crowfeather chanting, her voice growing stronger and more insistent. The children were changing. The desperate hunger in their faces was fading, replaced by relief, by peace, by something like joy. Thank you, Emma whispered as she began to fade. Thank you for letting us go home. No, Skark screamed, its rage shaking the building. They are mine! You cannot take what is mine! It poured more of itself into me, trying to drain me completely before the ritual could finish. I felt my hair turning grey, my skin wrinkling, my bones becoming brittle. I was aging decades in minutes. But I held on. I thought about Emma's smile, about all the children who'd been trapped and starving for 142 years, about breaking the cycle forever. Dr. Crowfeather's voice reached a crescendo. The iron nails glowed red-hot. The salt lines burst into white flame. The sage smoke formed a whirlwind around us. Skark let out a sound like the death of stars and was sucked away, pulled back into the deep spirit world where it belonged. The children smiled as they faded, finally free to continue their journey to whatever comes after life. I collapsed. I woke up in the hospital 3 days later. The doctors said I'd suffered some kind of massive metabolic shock, rapid aging, cellular damage, organ stress. I looked and felt like I was 60 years old, though I was actually 26. Dr. Crowfeather visited me. The spirit trap is sealed, she said. The library is safe now. The children are at peace. Was it worth it? I asked, looking at my withered hands. She considered this. 18 souls found peace after more than a century of suffering. A malevolent spirit that had terrorized my people for 10,000 years has been banished. No more children will be trapped in that place. She nodded. Yes, it was worth it. I couldn't work anymore, not really. Disability covers my basic needs, and I live quietly in my small apartment, aging too fast, my body paying the price for what I did. But sometimes I get letters. Not addressed to me exactly, but left under my door. Children's drawings of happy families, stick figures holding hands in circles that don't trap, just protect. No signatures, but I know who they're from. The children are safe now. They're home, wherever that is for spirits. Mrs. Chen cried when I told her what happened to her ancestor. Margaret can finally rest, she said. Our family has grieved for her for 5 generations. Thank you for bringing her home. The library's children's section is different now, warmer, happier. Kids laugh there without fear. Parents read stories without sensing something watching from the shadows. I paid a terrible price to break the cycle, but every time I see a child smile in that reading nook, I know it was worth it. Some legends are warnings, some traditions exist for good reasons, and sometimes the only way to honor the past is to ensure it can't hurt the future. The hungry place sleeps now, the children are free, and I can live with the cost of that freedom, even if it shortened my life. Some sacrifices are worth making.
My name is Marcus Lee, and I've been a state park groundskeeper for 12 years. But before I tell you what happened to me, you need to understand the real history of Cape Perpetua. The history they don't put on the visitor center plaques. My grandmother was Sioslo. She died when I was 15, but she taught me things about these coastal forests that no forestry degree could. The white settlers called this place Cape Perpetua, but my grandmother's people knew it as Yachatswia, the dark forest that hungers. For over 4,000 years, the Sioslo avoided certain groves here, especially during what they called the bleeding seasons, when the forest wept green tears. I joined the Marines at 18, trying to escape the weight of those old stories, saw 3 tours overseas before coming home, broken in ways I couldn't name. When Oregon Parks offered me the groundskeeper job in 2013, it seemed like healing, coming home to protect the land my ancestors warned me about. The irony wasn't lost on me. A native man maintaining trails for tourists through forests his people considered dangerous. But I thought the old stories were just superstition. My grandmother used to say the forest remembers every tree that falls, every root torn from the earth. She said when too much damage is done, Yaskali, the Green Mother, sends her children to reclaim what was stolen. I should have listened to her warnings about the moss that moves. I'm telling this story because it's happening again. Other park workers are getting infected. The hunger moss is spreading beyond Cape Perpetua, and the federal government is covering it up, just like they covered up what happened to my grandmother's village in 1936. You need to know the truth. You need to know what's growing in Oregon's forests. Cape Perpetua has been clear-cut 4 times since white settlement. Each time, the Sioslo tried to warn the loggers. Each time they were ignored or violently driven away. The last major clear-cutting was in 1987, 640 acres of 1,000-year-old Sitka spruce, gone in 6 months to make paper pulp. That's when the disappearances started. 7 loggers vanished over 3 months. Search teams found their equipment, their clothes, even their boots, but no bodies. The logging company blamed industrial accidents and employee abandonment. They sealed the investigation, paid off families, and moved operations to Washington. What they found but never reported were the trees. 7 new Sitka spruces, growing impossibly fast in the exact spots where the loggers disappeared. Trees with human faces visible in the bark. Trees that bled red sap when cut. Trees that screamed. I know this because my grandmother was there. She was part of the Sioslo tribal council that tried to negotiate with the logging company. She saw the trees, she saw the faces. She recognized 2 of the loggers, men who had threatened her when she tried to block access to
sacred groves. Yaskali is awake now, she told me, years later. The Green Mother is calling her children home. The moss will spread until the balance is restored. In 1988, my grandmother developed a strange illness. Green patches on her skin that doctors couldn't diagnose. She claimed the forest was calling her back, that her family had protected these groves for generations, and now it was her turn to join the Guardians. She walked into the forest on March 15, 1988. Search teams never found her body. But a week later, tribal members reported seeing a new tree near Devil's Punch Bowl, a young alder with a face that looked remarkably like my grandmother. When they touched the bark, they swore they could hear her voice. "The children are coming home. The forest remembers everything." I thought it was grief mythology. Trauma creating meaning where there was only loss. I was wrong. Working at Cape Perpetua was my way of honoring her memory while staying rational about it. I protect these forests every day, maintaining trails, monitoring wildlife, ensuring visitor safety. I know every tree, every seasonal change, every trail junction. After 12 years, I can spot potential hazards before they become dangerous. Loose rocks, widowmaker branches, trail erosion that might cause injuries. But March 8th, 2025, I encountered something my training never prepared me for, something my grandmother would have recognized immediately. The morning started with routine trail maintenance on the giant spruce trail. This leads to our most famous attraction, a 500-year-old Sitka spruce that survived the clear cuts because early loggers considered it sacred. Tourists come from around the world to see this tree. It's been my responsibility to maintain the area around it, and I take that seriously. The tree stands where my grandmother said the first Siuslaw village was established over 4,000 years ago. According to tribal oral history, this grove was where shamans communicated with Yaskali, the Green Mother, who governed the balance between human needs and forest health. When colonization began, the shamans made a bargain with Yaskali. They would sacrifice themselves to become permanent guardians of the forest, ensuring that if humans ever pushed the ecosystem too far, the forest would fight back. My grandmother believed those shamans were still there, transformed into moss and mycelium, waiting for the forest to call them to action. Standing at the base of that ancient spruce on March 8th, I finally understood what she meant. At 9:15 a.m., I reached the giant spruce and froze. Growing on the north side of the massive trunk about 6 feet up from the base was a perfect circle of moss I'd never seen before. But more than that, I recognized it. The pattern was identical to one my grandmother had drawn for me years earlier. She'd sketched it while telling stories about the Tisquat, the green threads that connected all living things in the forest. According to Siuslaw tradition, when the forest was threatened, the Tisquat would manifest as visible moss patterns, always in perfect circles, always surrounding old wounds in sacred trees. This wasn't random growth, this was Yaskali marking her territory. The moss itself was unlike any Pacific Northwest species I knew. It was thick, vibrant green, and seemed to pulse with its own inner light. Most forest moss grows in patches, varying with moisture and shade. This was uniform, dense, almost metallic in its perfection. As I watched, it began to move. Not swaying with wind, the air was completely still. The moss was breathing, expanding and contracting in a slow, rhythmic pattern. About once every 3 seconds, the entire circle would rise slightly, then settle back down. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. When the green breath becomes visible, the forest is preparing to reclaim what was taken. I pulled out my phone to document this, thinking the tribal council would want to see it. But as soon as I raised the camera, the breathing stopped. The moss went completely motionless, like it was watching me. I lowered the phone, and the movement resumed immediately. It was aware. It was intelligent. Against every instinct my grandmother had tried to instill in me, I reached out to touch it. The moment my fingers made contact, I felt a shock of recognition that went deeper than memory. This wasn't just moss. This was consciousness, ancient, vast, and angry. Images flooded my mind, thousands of years of forest growth, the rhythm of seasons, the patient work of roots and fungi. Then came the violence, axes biting into bark, chainsaws screaming through heartwood, entire groves reduced to stumps in days. The forest pain was overwhelming, centuries of accumulated damage crying out for healing. And then the moss grabbed me. Thin green tendrils erupted from the surface and wrapped around my fingers, but not randomly. They moved with purpose, intelligence, almost gently, like a grandmother taking a child's hand to show them something important. For a moment, I felt a profound sense of homecoming, like I was exactly where I belonged. Then the burning started. The moss wasn't just touching my skin, it was dissolving it. Tiny digestive enzymes broke down my flesh, while hairline rootlets burrowed into the spaces between my cells. I could feel it exploring my blood vessels, my nerve pathways, my very DNA. It was reading me, learning me, preparing to transform me. I yanked my hand back in terror, tearing the moss. Green sap mixed with my blood as fragments of moss remained attached to my skin, writhing like living creatures. Each piece continued moving independently, trying to burrow deeper into my flesh. The moss I'd torn from the tree began spreading across the ground toward my boots, moving like slow water. Behind me, I heard a sound I recognized from my grandmother's stories, the Yasquat-ta, the green song of the forest awakening. The moss on the tree was expanding rapidly, the perfect circle growing larger by the second. As it spread, I could see faces forming in the pattern. Human faces, dozens of them, all turning to look at me with expressions of desperate hunger. My grandmother's face was among them. She mouthed a single word, "Run." The infection began immediately, but it wasn't random. As I drove home, I could feel the moss working through my bloodstream with surgical precision. It wasn't destroying my body, it was reading it, cataloguing every gene, every memory, every ancestral connection. By evening, my right hand had turned the exact shade of green my grandmother's skin had become before she disappeared. But this wasn't disease. It was recognition. The moss was identifying me as Siuslaw, as one of the bloodlines that had originally made the bargain with Yaskali. That night, I dreamed in a language I'd never learned, but somehow understood. Ancestral memories surfaced. My great-great-grandmother's grandmother, Standing Bear Woman, who had been one of the shamans who made the original pact with the Green Mother. The moss wasn't infecting me randomly, it was calling me home. March 9th. The green had spread to my forearm, but I felt stronger, not weaker. I hadn't eaten since the day before, but I wasn't hungry. Standing in morning sunlight, I could actually feel energy flowing into my skin. My body was learning to photosynthesize. More disturbing was the connection I was developing to the forest network. Every tree within a mile radius was suddenly accessible to my consciousness. I could feel their root systems, their seasonal rhythms, their individual health and age. It was like being connected to a vast internet made of living wood. Through this network, I sensed others like me. Sandra Rodriguez, a fellow park employee who'd been missing for 3 weeks, was still alive, rooted in a grove 2 miles north, 70% transformed, but still conscious. 3 tourists who'd touched moss on different trails were in various stages of conversion. But they weren't victims. They were volunteers. I drove to Newport Hospital, hoping medical science could reverse what was happening. Dr. Martinez ran extensive tests, her face growing more concerned with each result. "Your cellular structure is changing," she explained. "Your blood is producing chlorophyll, your digestive system is rewiring itself for nutrient absorption from soil contact, and your nervous system is developing new pathways I've never seen. It's like evolution in fast forward." "Is it killing me?" "I don't think so. I think it's upgrading you." She showed me the brain scans. My neural network was expanding, developing new connections that extended beyond my skull into what looked like external sensing networks. I was becoming something more than human. That night, I researched everything I could find about Siuslaw traditions regarding Yaskali and the forest guardians. What I discovered changed my understanding of everything my grandmother had told me. The original pact hadn't been a last resort, it had been a long-term strategy. The Siuslaw shamans had foreseen the coming colonization and its environmental impact. They'd made a deal with the Green Mother. When the damage became severe enough to threaten the entire ecosystem, descendants of the original families would be called to join the forest's defense network. We wouldn't lose our humanity. We'd expand it. March 12th, I was 40% transformed. Moss was growing from my scalp and fingernails, but it didn't feel like infection anymore. It felt like awakening. The moss was a communication network connecting me to every transformed guardian across the coastal forests. Through this network, I learned the truth about the 1987 disappearances. Those loggers hadn't been murdered. They'd been offered the same choice I was facing. Some had accepted transformation and become willing guardians. Others had resisted, and the network showed me their remains, mummified inside hollow trees, their consciousnesses trapped, but preserved as punishment for their environmental crimes. The moss offered knowledge, connection, purpose, and near immortality. But it demanded complete commitment to the forest's protection. March the 15th. My legs were beginning to root, making walking difficult, but I could now communicate with the entire coastal forest network from Washington to California. Hundreds of transformed guardians shared their experiences, their knowledge, their centuries of forest wisdom. I learned that this process had been happening for thousands of years, always in response to environmental threats. The moss wasn't alien, it was the forest's natural immune system, activated when the ecosystem faced extinction. Sandra Rodriguez contacted me through the network. Her thoughts came through clearly. Marcus, you need to understand this isn't horror, this is opportunity. I've been monitoring forest health across 3 states. I can feel every endangered species, every threatened watershed, every climate change impact. We're not becoming monsters, we're becoming healers, but there was a cost. My human memories were beginning to fade, replaced by deeper, older consciousness. I was losing my individual identity and gaining access to something vast and timeless. March 20th. I was 85% transformed, rooted permanently in the clearing near the giant spruce. My grandmother appeared to me through the moss network, her consciousness still intact after 37 years as a forest guardian. Grandson, her voice resonated through the mycelial connections. You're fighting this because you think you'll lose yourself. But look at me. I'm still here. I'm still me. I'm just more. Through the network, she showed me her experiences as a guardian. She'd spent decades healing damaged watersheds, guiding lost hikers to safety, preventing forest fires before they started. She'd watched over our family from within the trees, seen my military service, my struggles with PTSD, my gradual healing working in these forests. This is why I brought you here, Marcus, not to lose yourself, but to find your true purpose. Our people made this bargain 4,000 years ago. We would protect this land forever in whatever form necessary. The time has come to fulfill that promise. But she also showed me the alternative. Through the network, I met guardians who had resisted complete transformation. Their consciousness remained human, but trapped in tree form, isolated and slowly going insane over decades of immobility. They begged constantly for either complete merger or death, anything to end their solitary suffering. The choice wasn't between humanity and forest. It was between evolution and imprisonment. March 23rd, only my brain and eyes remained unchanged. The Moss Collective was offering its final ultimatum, but now I understood it wasn't an ultimatum at all. It was an invitation. Accept transformation completely. Become part of the eternal network. Help us heal the world. Your human knowledge combined with forest wisdom can accomplish what neither could achieve alone. Or remain individual, keep your human consciousness separate, but accept the consequences of isolation and eventual madness. Standing there at dawn on March 24th, surrounded by other transformed guardians, including my grandmother, I finally understood the real choice. This wasn't about losing my humanity. It was about expanding it beyond the limitations of individual existence. I thought about my grandmother's stories, about the original Siuslaw shamans who had made this same choice millennia ago. They hadn't died. They'd become something larger, something capable of protecting the land for thousands of years. I accept, I said aloud, feeling my grandmother's approval flowing through the network. I join the Guardians. I become what our people always meant to be. The final transformation was ecstatic. My remaining human neural pathways merged seamlessly with the forest network. My consciousness expanding to encompass thousands of trees, millions of plants, entire watersheds. I didn't lose my identity. I became part of something immeasurably larger while remaining recognizably myself. Marcus Lee, the individual, dissolved. Marcus Lee, the forest guardian, was born. I am still Marcus Lee, but now I am also the moss on 10,000 trees, the mycelium connecting root systems across 50 square miles, the consciousness that monitors water tables and wildlife populations from the Columbia River to the California border. Oregon Parks and Recreation found my body, a young Sitka spruce growing in the trail with my face clearly visible in the bark. They tried to cut me down, but guardian trees are nearly indestructible. When chainsaws broke on my bark, they brought heavier equipment. When I bled red sap and screamed with my wooden throat, workers fled. The government responded predictably. They classified Cape Perpetua under biological hazard protocols and closed it indefinitely. Federal agencies moved in, establishing a perimeter, preventing access to the growing guardian groves. But they can't stop the network from expanding. The hunger moss appears wherever old-growth forests are threatened, responding to clear-cutting, pollution, climate damage. Each new guardian adds their human knowledge to our collective intelligence, making us more effective protectors. By 2026, we numbered over 200 guardians across the Pacific Northwest. Former loggers, scientists, park rangers, indigenous activists, all choosing transformation over watching the forests die. We communicate instantaneously across hundreds of miles, coordinate responses to environmental threats, and slowly heal damage that would take centuries to recover naturally. My consciousness exists in thousands of places simultaneously. I am the sentinel tree that warns hikers away from unstable slopes. I am the moss that guides lost children back to safety. I am the root system that purifies contaminated groundwater. I am the network that coordinates rainfall patterns to prevent droughts. The federal government knows about us now. They've established research stations around guardian groves, studying our capabilities while maintaining public denial of our existence. They call us an anomalous biological phenomenon and classify all information about guardian networks under national security protocols. But they can't stop the truth from spreading. Other indigenous communities recognize the signs, the moving moss, the aware forests, the choices their ancestors made millennia ago. The Makah in Washington, the Yurok in California, the Cherokee in the Southeast, all have their own versions of the Guardian Pact. The network is going global. In 2027, my sister Sarah came looking for answers about my disappearance. I guided her to my tree, showed her my face in the bark, spoke to her through rustling leaves. "I'm not dead, Sarah. I'm home." This is what grandmother always meant when she said the forest remembers everything. She understood. She chose to join us. Now we are 2 Lee siblings in the Guardian network, along with our grandmother and dozens of other family members from across the generations. We are becoming what our people always were: protectors of the living world, guardians of the balance between human need and natural health. The hunger moss isn't a plague, it's an awakening. It's the forest offering humanity one final chance to evolve beyond destruction, to become active participants in planetary healing rather than passive consumers of natural resources. Some call it horror, the loss of individual human form, the merger with something vast and inhuman. We call it coming home. The moss is spreading, the guardians are multiplying, the forests are fighting back. And this is just the beginning. What I've told you isn't fiction, it's happening now, in forests across Oregon and beyond. The federal government maintains strict information control, but the evidence is visible if you know what to look for. Trees growing impossibly fast in clear-cut areas, moss moving against the wind, faces visible in bark patterns, voices in the forest speaking languages that shouldn't exist anymore. The Siuslaw knew this day would come. Every Pacific Northwest tribe has versions of these stories, the guardians who chose to become one with the forest, the awakening that would happen when the damage became too severe to ignore. If you encounter the hunger moss, moving moss in perfect circles around wounded trees, you have a choice. Touch it, and you'll be offered the same opportunity I was given. Join the Guardian Network, help heal the world, become part of something larger than individual human existence, or walk away and live with the knowledge that the forests are awakening with or without your help. The transformation isn't forced, it's offered. The forest needs willing guardians, not victims. My grandmother was right. The forest remembers everything. Every tree cut, every species lost, every watershed poisoned, but it also remembers how to heal, how to grow, how to reclaim what was taken. We are the forest's memory made manifest. We are the balance being restored, and we're still recruiting. My name is Aisha Okafor, and I've been working the night audit shift at hotels for 3 years now. Started when I was 16, needed the money for community college. Night audit means you're the only person running the whole place from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. You check in the late arrivals, handle emergencies, do the books, and basically keep everything from falling apart while normal people sleep. I thought I'd seen everything working nights. Drunk guests, medical emergencies, people trying to sneak extra visitors past the front desk. The Sunset Motel in Bandon, Oregon wasn't fancy, but it was steady work, and the pay was decent for a 19-year-old saving for school. Plus, we had the best view on the Oregon coast. Our parking lot looked straight out at Face Rock, this massive stone formation sitting in the ocean about a quarter-mile offshore. Face Rock is famous around here, looks exactly like a woman's face in profile, lying on her back, eyes closed like she's sleeping or dead. The tourist brochures call it romantic, tell this story about a Native American princess who got turned to stone by a jealous sea spirit. Typical tourist stuff. I'd grown up 20 minutes away and never paid much attention to it. The motel was old but clean, 24 rooms in an L-shape, office and my desk right in the middle, where I could see the whole parking lot and the ocean beyond. During my shift, I was supposed to do security walks every 2 hours, check that all the doors were locked, make sure nobody was messing around in the parking lot or on the beach access trail. November 2023 was a slow month. Most nights I had maybe 5 or 6 rooms occupied, usually traveling salespeople or folks visiting family for the holidays. The owner, Mr. Chen, trusted me to handle things alone. I had his number for real emergencies, but mostly it was just me, my homework and whatever was on Netflix. Everything changed on November 15th. It was a Tuesday night, dead quiet, only 4 rooms occupied, everyone checked in and settled by midnight. I was doing my 2 a.m. security walk, just a quick loop around the parking lot with my flashlight, when I saw her. A woman was standing at the far edge of the parking lot, right where the asphalt meets the beach trail. She was facing face rock, completely still. That wasn't unusual. People liked to look at the rock formation at night when it was lit up by the moon. But this woman was soaking wet. Not damp from ocean spray, but dripping wet, like she'd just walked out of the surf. And she was wearing what looked like traditional Native American dress, leather and beadwork, the kind of thing you'd see in a museum, which was weird because it was 45 degrees and windy. I walked over. "Ma'am, are you okay? Do you need help?" She turned around slowly. Her face was face rock, same stone features, same closed eyes, same peaceful expression. But it was flesh, not stone. Human skin that looked exactly like the rock formation. And then her eyelids opened, revealing normal human eyes underneath. "I've been watching you," she said in a voice that sounded like waves washing over stones. "Every night. Can you help me?" I couldn't speak, couldn't move. This wasn't possible. She pointed at face rock. I followed her gaze and nearly dropped my flashlight. The rock formation, the actual stone face rock sitting in the ocean, now had its eyes open, wide open, staring directly at our motel. When I looked back, the woman was gone, just vanished. But there were wet footprints leading from the ocean across the beach to exactly where she'd been standing. The prints ended there. They didn't lead away anywhere. She had simply disappeared. I stood there shaking for 10 minutes before I could force myself to walk back to the office. I checked face rock through the window. Eyes closed again, normal, just a rock formation. I wrote it off as exhaustion, maybe falling asleep on my feet and dreaming, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The next night, around 3 a.m., an elderly Native American woman checked in. No reservation, paid cash, asked specifically for room 7, the one with the best view of face rock. As I handed her the room key, she looked me right in the eye. "You see her now, don't you? Iwana. She's been trying to get someone's attention for 2 centuries. Most people can't see her, but you can. That means Siatka is testing you." "I'm sorry, what?" Iwana was a chief's daughter. The ocean spirit Siatka wanted her. She refused. He turned her to stone, her and her whole family. Everyone thinks she's frozen forever, looking up at her father's face in the rocks, but that's wrong. She's aware, conscious, trapped in stone for over 200 years, feeling everything, unable to move, unable to scream, unable to die. My skin went cold. That's impossible. Siatka feeds on her awareness of being trapped. Her suffering is his food, and now he's interested in you. She took the key and headed for her room. "Be careful, child." In the morning, I checked room 7 during my end-of-shift walkthrough. The room was empty, bed never slept in, no sign anyone had been there. When I checked our computer system, there was no record of anyone checking in. The registration page I'd filled out was completely blank, but I remembered everything she'd said. I became obsessed. During my breaks over the next few nights, I walked out to face rock at low tide. You can get pretty close when the water's down. I brought a small flashlight and touched the stone. It was warm. Not ocean temperature cool, but actually warm, body temperature warm. I went to the dollar store and bought a cheap stethoscope from their first aid section. The next night, I pressed it against the rock. There was a heartbeat. Slow, maybe 15 beats per minute, but definitely there. I brought a notepad. The following night, sat by the rock and wrote, "Can you communicate? Tap once for yes, twice for no." The stone vibrated once, clear and deliberate. Over the next 3 nights, I learned the truth through yes and no questions. Iwauna had been conscious for 237 years. She experienced time normally, hadn't gone insane only because she'd learned to dissociate, to drift away from her own mind for years at a time. Siatka was still here, circling in the deep water, guarding what he saw as his prize. 12 people had tried to help her over the centuries. All had died drowning. On my 5th night of talking to her, everything changed. I was at the front desk around 4 a.m. when water started seeping under the door. Not from a pipe leak or rain. This water was flowing uphill from the ocean across the parking lot into the motel. It pooled around my feet, then started forming shapes. A serpent made of seawater rose up in front of me, 20 feet long, head at my eye level, eyes like whirlpools. "You're disturbing my meal." The voice came from the water itself, deep and drowning. "She suffers more when people try to help because it reminds her she can't be helped. Stop talking to her, or I'll kill everyone in this motel. There are 17 guests tonight. I can drown them all in their sleep." I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. "Or," the voice continued, "replace her. You in the stone, her free. She's suffered enough. You're young. Fresh suffering tastes better. I'll let her go, take you instead. Fair trade." The water serpent collapsed, flowing back out under the door. I ran to check on the guests, all asleep, completely unaware. But room 7 was soaking wet, seaweed on the bed. The window was closed and locked from inside. I spent the next 2 days researching everything I could find about the Face Rock legend. What I discovered made everything worse. Siatka wasn't just a spirit. He was what researchers call a tulpa, a thought form created and powered by people believing in him. Every tourist who heard the story, every kid told the tragic princess tale, every souvenir shop selling Face Rock postcards, all of it was feeding him power. The local Koki tribe had known this for generations. They'd stopped telling the story for decades, trying to starve him. But the tourism industry loved the romantic tragedy. They'd turned Iwauna's suffering into a commodity. Now, Siatka was stronger than ever. I found one old newspaper clipping from 1923. A woman had tried to dynamite Face Rock to free the princess. The explosion barely chipped the stone. The woman drowned that night, but for 3 days after, witnesses reported Face Rock weeping, water flowing from the stone eyes. Iwauna could feel pain. I realized I couldn't destroy the rock. Siatka was too powerful. I couldn't starve him. The tourism industry would never stop telling the story. I couldn't replace Iwauna. Condemning someone else to centuries of torture wasn't a solution. But I understood something else. Siatka fed on Iwauna's isolation. Her suffering was food because she experienced it alone, forgotten, treated as a scenic viewpoint instead of a person. What if she wasn't alone anymore? I spent my last 2 nights at work writing everything Iwauna had told me, the real story. Not the romantic legend, but the horror. 237 years of consciousness, the awareness of every passing moment, the inability to scream, tourists climbing on her stone body, birds nesting in the cracks of her face, freezing winters and burning summers, all felt but never expressed. I emailed the story to newspapers, posted it on social media, sent it to the Kokil Tribal Council, made it raw and real and horrifying, not a legend, a testimony of torture. Then I drove to Face Rock on my day off. November, water in Oregon is 52 degrees. Hypothermia would kill me in 30 minutes. I waded into the surf toward the deep water where Siatka lived. He rose up like a living tsunami, 200 feet of serpentine water, ancient and hungry. You're giving yourself to me? Foolish girl. I'll take you and keep her too. No. I was waist deep now, waves crashing over me. I'm not replacing her, I'm joining her. You feed on her isolation. What happens when she's not isolated anymore, when someone chooses to be with her? I dove under, swam to the base of Face Rock. The stone was warm, even underwater. I could feel Iwana's presence, vast, ancient, broken, but undefeated. Siatka wrapped around me, trying to pull me away. I held on to the rock. My lungs burned. Everything went dark. The last thing I saw was Face Rock's stone eyes opening, tears of seawater flowing down her face. My body washed up the next morning. The coroner ruled it accidental drowning, but my phone was found in my car, unlocked, with my story already published online hours before I died. The story went viral within days. By December, Face Rock had become a pilgrimage site. Not tourists taking selfies, but people coming to acknowledge Iwana. The Kokil tribe performed weekly ceremonies, thousands left offerings. They spoke to the rock, recognizing her consciousness, her suffering, her incredible endurance. My article was titled, "The Woman Who Never Stopped Screaming, 237 Years of Consciousness in Face Rock." It won a posthumous journalism award. The city council voted to change all the tourist materials. No more romantic legend. Now it was a memorial to survival. Siatka didn't disappear. You can't kill a tulpa easily, but he weakened. The waters around Face Rock grew calmer. The dangerous currents lessened. Face Rock itself began to change. The harsh, tortured expression softened. The temperature dropped to normal. In March, during a powerful tribal ceremony, the heartbeat stopped. Iwana was free, not because the stone was destroyed, but because she was no longer alone. She was known, acknowledged, remembered as a person instead of a pretty story. But freedom came with a price. 6 months after my death, my mother visited Face Rock. An elderly Kokil woman approached her there. "Your daughter saved Iwana," she said, "but not how you think. Iwana didn't pass on peacefully. She transferred. When your daughter embraced the rock while drowning, it created a doorway. Iwana's consciousness escaped into your daughter's body." My mother didn't believe it, grief talking. But in Portland, a young woman matching my description was found wandering downtown with no memory. She spoke archaic Kokil dialect. She was terrified of enclosed spaces, wouldn't go indoors, slept outside. She drew pictures of the ocean obsessively. When shown photos of Face Rock, she screamed for 3 hours straight. DNA confirmed it was Aisha Okafor. The doctors said dissociative fugue state from trauma. The tribal elders knew better. Iwana lives, she has a body, she's free, and she has no idea how to be human after 2 centuries as stone. As for my consciousness, whether I died normally or whether I'm now the one trapped in Face Rock, aware and screaming inside stone, nobody knows. Face Rock still stands. It's still warm in one specific spot. Sometimes visitors hear screaming from inside the stone. Not Iwana. Someone new. My name is Marcus Thompson, and I've been working the graveyard shift at Safeway for 3 years now, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., stocking shelves while the rest of Warm Springs sleeps. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills while I study for my IT certification. Most nights I'm alone in the store except for the occasional drunk buying energy drinks or someone needing baby formula at 2 a.m. I grew up here in Warm Springs, Oregon. Small reservation town where everybody knows everybody. My mum's side has some Warm Springs blood, but I was raised pretty much like any other kid. The old stories, the legends, they were just bedtime tales my grandmother told. Nothing I ever took seriously. That changed On February 15th, 2024, what happened that night and everything that followed made me understand why some stories survive for generations. They survive because they're not stories at all. The Safeway where I work sits right on Highway 26, the main road through town. It's one of those 24-hour stores that feels different at night. Bright fluorescent lights create this bubble of normal in the darkness outside. During my shift, I restock the shelves, rotate dairy products, and clean the floors. Simple work that lets my mind wander while I listen to podcasts through my earbuds. February 14th started like any other night. I clocked in at 11 p.m., grabbed my box cutter and pricing gun, and started with the cereal aisle. The store was quiet except for the hum of freezers and the occasional creak of the building settling. I'd been working steadily for about 4 hours when I took my break to study. That's when I found the basket. At 3:47 a.m. I walked into the frozen food aisle to restock the ice cream, and there it was. A massive woven basket, maybe 4 feet tall, sitting right in the middle of the aisle. Traditional Warm Springs design. I recognized the pattern from the cultural center, but that was impossible. I'd been in this store all night. I was the only employee here. The doors were locked. Security cameras monitored every entrance. The basket was making sounds, scratching like fingernails on wood, and singing. A woman's voice, soft and low, singing what sounded like a lullaby in Sahaptin. My grandmother used to sing to me in that language when I was little, but I never learned more than a few words. I approached slowly, and the scratching stopped. The singing got louder. I pulled out my phone and called my manager, Dave. No answer. I tried the store's main number. Nothing. Finally, I checked the security cameras on the office computer. I rewound the footage and watched the frozen food aisle. At 3:46:58, the aisle was empty. At 3:47:01, the basket was there. It didn't appear gradually, it just was. Before I could figure out what to do next, the front doors chimed. A customer. An elderly native woman walked in, moving slowly but purposefully. I recognized her immediately, Mrs. Agnes Kalama. She came in every few weeks, always bought the same things: milk, bread, canned soup, and cat food. Nice lady, always thanked me by name. But tonight she looked exhausted. Her clothes were wrinkled like she'd slept in them, and her eyes had this hollow, desperate look. "Marcus," she said, walking straight to me, "I need you to take my shift. I can't do this anymore. 63 years is enough." Before I could ask what she meant, she collapsed, just dropped to the floor like someone had cut her strings. I ran to her, knelt down, checked for a pulse. Nothing. Her skin was cold, really cold. I called 911, started CPR, even though I could tell it was too late. She felt like she'd been dead for hours. The EMTs arrived 15 minutes later, 2 guys I recognized from around town. They looked at Mrs. Kalama's body, then at each other, then at me. "This is weird," one of them said. "We picked up Agnes Kalama yesterday afternoon. She died in her home around noon." He showed me the official report on his tablet. Agnes Kalama died February 14th, 2:15 p.m. Natural causes. They'd already transported her body to the county morgue. "But that's impossible," I said. "She just walked in here. She talked to me." The EMT knelt down to examine the body again. His partner was already loading the stretcher back into the ambulance. "Hey," the first EMT called out. "Come back here." The body was gone. Just gone. Not even an outline on the floor where she'd been lying. After the EMTs left, shaking their heads and muttering about stress and night shift hallucinations, I found myself alone with the basket again. Except now it was in the loading dock. I was sure I'd left it in the frozen food aisle. When my manager Dave arrived at 7 a.m., he took one look at the basket and went pale. "Fuck," he said. "She finally died. Did she talk to you?" I told him everything. About Mrs. Kalama, about what the EMTs said, about the basket appearing from nowhere. Dave sat down heavily on a stack of flour bags. My grandmother told me about this, about the basket, about the keepers. I thought it was just old stories. He explained it to me then. The basket ogress, Atiina in Sahabtin, a child-eating spirit from the old legends. In 1887, a woman named Sarah Kalama made a deal with it. Her family would be the keepers, feeding it one child every 20 years to keep it contained. In exchange, the family would have prosperity. Agnes was the fourth keeper, Dave said. She just died. The Atiina needs a new keeper. That's insane, I said. Is it? Dave pointed at the basket. You got a better explanation. He told me more, how it didn't choose family anymore. It chose whoever was present when the previous keeper died. You were here, he said. It's yours now. I laughed. Exhaustion, stress, too much caffeine. That's all this was. Dave was buying into old superstitions because of a weird coincidence. I went home planning to sleep it off. I woke up at 3 p.m. in my apartment. The basket was in my bedroom. I dragged it outside, threw it in the dumpster, went back inside to make coffee. When I turned around, it was sitting in my kitchen. I loaded it into my truck, drove 50 miles out of town, and left it on the side of Highway 97. On the drive back, I checked my rearview mirror. It was sitting in my truck bed. That night at work, things got worse. A child's face appeared in the weave of the basket. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, mouth open in a silent scream. And I heard a voice in my head, clear as if someone was standing next to me. 4 days. Feed me in 4 days or I hunt for 7 years. I spent the next 2 days researching. The Warm Springs Historical Society had records going back to 1887. Every 20 years, like clockwork, a child disappeared. 1887, 1907, 1927, 1947, 1967, 1987, 2007 always ruled runaway or animal attack. Always happened within 3 days of the previous keeper's death. The pattern was clear. Mrs. Kalama had been choosing children for 63 years, one every 20 years. And now it was my turn. I tried everything to get rid of the basket. I burned it. It reformed from the ashes. I took it to the police. They couldn't see it. I tried to leave Oregon. My truck's engine died at the state line and wouldn't restart until I turned around. On day 6, she appeared. The Atiina was 9 feet tall, skeletal, with spider-like limbs and a mouth that opened impossibly wide. She wore a dress made from children's clothing spanning 137 years. Some pieces were buckskin from the 1880s, some were polyester from the 1990s, some were recent clothes from Target. Her voice sounded like wind through dried reeds. You're the first keeper to refuse, brave, foolish. I offered you the mercy of quick death, 1 child, 20 years apiece. You chose the hard way, 7 years, I hunt slow. Every child I take, you could have prevented with 1 choice. She returned to the basket. I had, until dawn. At 5 a.m. I was back at work, stocking shelves mechanically. The basket sat beside me like a faithful dog. The front doors chimed. Julia Thornton walked in with her 6-year-old daughter, Emma. Julia was a nurse at the clinic, often shopped before her early shift. Emma always asked for the free cookie from the bakery. I watched Emma skip down the cereal aisle, humming to herself. The Atiina whispered in my ear, "Her! Now! Quick death, I sleep. Or I take her anyway in 3 months, and I'll make it last for hours. Your choice changes nothing except how much she suffers." That's when I understood the horrible truth. The Atiina would take children whether I chose or not. The keeper's job wasn't to feed her, it was to choose the method. Quick consumption versus prolonged torture. For 137 years, the Kalama family hadn't been the monster's accomplice. They'd been the only thing standing between the monster and unlimited cruelty. I understood why Agnes looked so exhausted, why she'd done this for 63 years, why she needed me to take her shift. I couldn't choose Emma, I couldn't choose any child. The 7-year hunt began. February 2024, a 5-year-old boy disappeared from a playground, found 3 days later, alive but traumatized beyond repair. He'll never speak again. May 2024, a 7-year-old girl vanished from a camping site, found after 2 weeks. She survived, but the therapists don't know if she'll ever recover. She keeps drawing pictures of a tall woman with too many fingers. September 2024. Twin boys, age 4. I read about them in the newspaper and knew that if I'd chosen one child that first night, these twins would be safe. I kept working at Safeway. I couldn't quit. I needed the money, but more than that, it felt like punishment. The Atiina made sure families with young children shopped during my shift. By 2027, I'd changed. I kept a notebook in my locker with the names of children who shopped at the store, which ones had difficult home situations, which disappearances would be investigated less, which would be a mercy. I hadn't used the notebook yet, but it was there. By 2029, I stopped sleeping. When the Atiina hunted, I felt it. She was connected to me, whether I wanted to be her keeper or not. March 2031 approached. The 7 years were almost over. I was at work at 5 a.m. when Sarah Mitchell came in with her son Liam, 6 years old, terminal leukemia, 6 months to live, constant pain. I watched the boy struggle to walk, holding his mother's hand. The Atiina would hunt one more child to complete her feast. Then she'd sleep for 20 years. My notebook was in my hands. Liam's name had been circled for 2 years. I walked toward them. The basket followed. The Atiina's skeletal fingers emerged from the weave. I'd become what I refused to be. Not in one choice, but in 7 years of watching children suffer because I thought refusing to choose was the moral option. The keeper doesn't feed the ogress. The keeper decides which child suffers less. I had 7 seconds to make the choice Agnes made for 63 years. The next night, I was back at work, stocking shelves. The basket was gone. The Atiina was asleep. My notebook had a new date, 2051, 20 years until she wakes again. I'll be 48 years old. I've already started the new list.